Hello folks, this video is gonna be really long video, probably the longest video I have ever done until now. So bear with me until the end because there are really good informations for you and for this camera, and I'm going to talk about a lot of things in this video. So take a good cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and let's chat. Today we're going to talk about the Nikon Z6 Mark III. Nikon has just unleashed the beast. But before we go into the specs and the overall specs, and I will let you know if I'm actually going to pre-order this or not. One thing is that I hoped the LUMIX S5IIX was this camera. In the video specs at least. Because they are kind of on the same price range. 200 more, 200 less. The Nikon Z6, for what it delivers, it actually a huge buy. But let's go straight into the specs and let's stop basically blabbering. So Nikon has just created a new type of sensor that has never been done before. A partially stacked sensor. What I mean? We have usually this rectangular sensor and basically what they did is that part of the sensor are stacked and part are not, are normal. So what they do is that they basically applied two different things like up and down of the sensor. So basically the sensor will read out faster. So basically, well, we all know how a sensor works. And it's really good. It's damn good. Like, depending on what frame rate you're shooting with, I'm not gonna go in specific on that. Gerald has a beautiful video talking about more in depth about this. Mine is more of an overall view. It's amazing. It's gonna do between 6 milliseconds and 9.5 milliseconds. That's insane. Basically, this camera has no issue with rolling shutter. In electronic shutter in pictures, of course, there's gonna be still a little bit of like, you know, weird shaped balls or weird bats shapes, but this sensor is crazy fast for a $2,500 camera, okay? The only sensor that can actually be compared to this sensor is the R6 Mark II and the R3. That's it. In this price range, of course. The R3 cost way more, so let's not talk about that. But it's still kind of, you know, costs more, but it's still there. Nikon has done a huge job. But that comes with a quirk, dynamic range, that we're gonna talk about a little bit later in this video. So, electronically, this camera can shoot 20 frames per second electronically, in mechanical 14 frames per second. Then it can do 30 and 60 frames per second only in JPEG, and then 120 frames per second as the Z8 and the Z9 at an 11 megapixels because it crops in at a 1.5 crop about. So from 24 that we have, it just crops of almost a little bit less than half. So that's it. And all of this raw format of shooting are gonna be in 14-bit RAW. So you're not gonna lose anything. They are all in 14-bit RAW. Wow, Nikon did an amazing thing. The EVF is probably the most crazy EVF that has been created at the moment because it has two beautiful things. One, it has the brightest EVF you can ever find around, which is a whopping 4,000 nit of brightness in a freaking EVF. Well, well done. Try to not get blind, but though. Then it has basically it's been rated as HDR EVF or DCI-B3 color space. So As Gerald then said,
and it even supports DCI P3 color gamut in case, you wanted to edit your videos using your viewfinder.
well, you have a color calibrator EVF. Weird stuff, but amazing for photographers or videographers who actually use the EVF to see pretty clear scenes. So, chapeau Nikon. And it has probably one of the best fully articulated screen because it comes at 3.2 inches, basically as the LUMIX S5IIX and the LUMIX S5, but it comes at a 2.1 million dots of resolution, so basically one of the best resolutions you can find around. Sony don't even come close. LUMIX is near there because we have 1.8 million dots. So it's quite amazing. It comes with 8 stops of image stabilization, and then it has, of course, it crops in if you use the E stabilization, but it has really a beautiful thing that I think no other company do. They have this weird mechanism where the stabilization actually don't work based on basically I have a frame and then it's just trying to keep the whole frame stabilized, but it works according to where the subject in the frame is. So if I'm like here, for example, it will work to stabilize more this part of the image more than the whole image, if you understand what I mean. So it's not at LUMIX level of stabilization, but I think if they work even more on the stabilization, they might actually bring something really cool and something really, really beautiful. They might need to work still a little bit on the algorithm because in the images I saw, it's still kind of a little bit shaky, but it's better than the Sony image stabilization. That's my point of view. Then they have implemented their own pixel shift, which they have had for a long time already, so it's not really an implementation, but they just have it. The only thing is that it doesn't combine the image in camera as the LUMIX S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX do, and you will need a tripod, so you don't have a handheld high res mode. And the other thing is, of course, because it doesn't combine the image into the camera, you will need a third-party editor program. So the most used is Lightroom or so ever. Other companies have many others. So this is quite cool. And now I've talked mostly about basically the photo specs. Let's go into the most interesting part for me, which is the video specs. And that's where this camera blew my mind. And it's making it more difficult for me to hold on my S5 Mark IIX. But all of this are going to be in PAL because I live in PAL region, but who is in NTC, you can somehow understand because we are all in the same world, so we know the difference between PAL and NTC. So Nikon can shoot a whopping 6K up to 50 frames per second in NRAW only, internally in the CFS Type B card. Yeah, you hear right, internally. So what Nikon did with red makes sense. So they kind of avoid the whole problem they had in the last 4 to 3 years with the battle with red because of the pattern. I hope Nikon would just break that pattern and throw it away so many other companies can actually bring their own RAW, and finally everyone is kind of free from this BS of internal RAW issues. And it can shoot internally still, everything that I'm talking about now is internally to the camera. It can shoot ProRes RAW up to 6K 25 frames per second, ProRes HQ up to 5.4 24 25 frames per second. ProRes 422 up to 4K 60 frames per second. It can shoot at H.265 up to 5.4K 60 frames per second only in 16:9. Then it can shoot 4K 50 oversampling, and this is the best part because it can shoot 120 frames per second with a 1.5 crop. But for what I've seen, it's crystal clear. I mean, it's true 4K. So because of how fast the sensor is, they don't need to do any weird quirk and downgrading the image and stuff like that. So it's kind of a cropping in the image and basically bringing it down to true 4K. So that's amazing. And all of this is in true N log, which it's one of the most beautiful logs. I still think Vlog is still the best, but N log, it's beautiful for what I've seen. I never really realized how beautiful N log was until I started doing researches when this camera was coming out. And yeah, wow. And one beautiful thing that Nikon is not really talking about, which is pretty weird, is that their cameras actually have two native ISOs, one to 800 and one to 6400. And it's quite weird that they don't talk about it or they don't really publicize it, but it's quite interesting because through tests that many YouTubers have done, this came out already when the Nikon NF, the smaller body, came out. They already noticed this. And then now with this sensor that is basically same sensor as the NF, just kind of newer version because of the implementation of the partially stacked sensor, they actually show it that there is, like Gerald and Dan show it that this camera actually have two native ISOs. So this is really, really cool. And overheating, you will ask, what is the problem with overheating? Because this camera don't have a fan. You can shoot inside, internally to CFast, be a whopping raw and raw. Yeah, this camera don't overheat that easily because there was a YouTuber that I will post the name on the screen because I don't remember, did an overheating test and was shooting in Texas. So you know Texas. Was shooting at 6K, they were shooting at 6K up to 60 frames per second and raw at about 37, between 37 and 40 degrees Celsius, which is I think 74 to 104 Fahrenheit. In run sunlight, and at 22 minutes the warning came up, and then at a whopping about 50 minutes the camera decided to overheat. So to the highest capability that this camera had, it overheated after 50 minutes without a fan, okay? Let it sink in, okay? And then it has a beautiful thing that not many companies are implementing that I hope they will implement pretty soon, which is a beautiful AF in low light. What I mean, with a lens that it has capabilities of 2.8, this camera is C-rated for -10 EV. So until -10 EV, you will be able to basically focus on people and stuff like that. And that's amazing because many camera struggles already after -3. So of course there have to be many tests, but for the ones that I see, this is amazing. And they have finally introduced a new way of monitoring or exposure tool, which is waveforms. So now the Z6 Mark III has a waveform. My favorite way to expose properly scene, and then false color, but false color only the R6 Mark II has it. So I hope they will introduce it in many other cameras and companies. Then there is going to be some sort of camera to cloud, which is going to be only through Dropbox and Google Photos. Then you can literally do something that you can still not do with the latest Lumix cameras, which is through the HDMI bypass to an external monitor and still be able to monitor completely what you're seeing in your monitor to what you're seeing to the back screen. So in the Lumix, we know when you connect the HDMI, you lose the information on your back screen because everything gets screened on the monitor. While this camera literally lets you do both. And the best thing that I've seen you are able to do is that when you switch to the ISO, to the EVF, the monitor switches to the EVF too. So you can literally be seeing your EVF from the monitor. I don't know what you will need that for, but it's there if you need it. Pretty cool, huh? Maybe you are watching in the EVF and you want to show it to someone else. I don't know. But there is a weird quirk still in this camera, which it has 2 hours and 5 minutes of recording limits. So if you are recording an event and you want to use this camera as a stable camera there, just filming the whole thing, be cautious, because if it's longer than 2 hours, then it will be difficult for you to just not go back and stop and start recording again. Just bear that in mind, okay? Now we have some cons, okay? Because this camera is not, well, this camera is near perfection for the price, let me say, but it has some things that we have to talk about, like the dynamic range, because unfortunately the sensor is fast, but it comes at the cost of dynamic range, as everything new, like in this world, every sensor, new sensor, the faster they do it, it seems like dynamic range tend to suffer. And that's pretty a bummer. Like the global shutter from Sony, dynamic range suffered. Basically the R6 Mark II, faster sensor, dynamic range suffers. But even though I think the latest cameras from Canon, except the R3 and maybe the R5 and all the cinema cameras, but like the R6, the R6 Mark II, the R8, the dynamic range are not that great. You can work around them. I shot with them, so I know what I'm talking about, but whatever. Now we are talking about the Nikon Z6 Mark III. So the dynamic range, through Gerald done test, so the dynamic range only, like I'm talking about only raw format, so not color graded or anything, it is between 9.5 to 10.5 max, okay? And that's not great because the Lumix and Sony cameras have rated basically up to 13 stops, because they are like, 14 stop of dynamic range rated. So it's not great. These are like the numbers that you will have even with the R6 Mark II and the R6. So it's kind of a little bit of a bummer that they tend to suffer on that, but for what I've seen that people are doing, the image is so beautiful after they color grade it. So I guess you just have to expose properly your image on the scene, like just double check, because with Sony and Lumix, you can maybe have a little error or some here and there, maybe crush a little bit more your shadows, crush a little bit more your highlights. At least with Lumix, you can do that. And you can bring them back really easily with few things that you can do. But I don't know. I have to get my hands on this camera and test it out. But the dynamic range suffers from this faster readout. It doesn't have a hot shoe, which it's a weird thing because every other manufacturer now is introducing a hot shoe. doesn't have a sensor shield, so your sensor, if you turn it off, it's not going to be covered like the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX. No open gate or shutter angle, which with this amazing specs of video capabilities that this camera has, it's a little bit of a bummer. I think they could have at least introduced a 3x2 open gate, because I don't understand why cameras don't want to do it. Companies don't want to do it, but whatever. Shutter angle, you can get by that by using the shutter speed, but if shutter angle is important for you, you don't have it in this camera. You don't have any type of implementation as real-time LUT or your own LUT upload, so you can't use your own LUT in this camera as for now. There is no backup recording because you have a C fast type B, and then you have a V90 UHS 2 reader card there, card slot. So for the moment, they haven't done the redundancy, so you don't have it, but through an external monitor, you can do that. There is still kind of an issue from what I've seen with the EF getting sticker to your body. So it's like if someone is like passing like this with the hands, like I'm doing now, and the focus is still kind of, you know, tracking my body, tracking my face, you're gonna have issue because it's going to like jump all around to find images. And yeah, that's kind of a problem that all Nikon cameras are suffering from. Yeah, and as for last, it still has those annoying dingling dangles on the sides for the neck strap. So that's a bummer because I think everyone hate it, especially videographers, because it does so much noise and it's just annoying. So yeah, guys, this is a whopping huge long video, but it was important for me to talk about this and to bring the whole summary that I've managed to gather from all around the YouTube, just for you guys. I think I will pre-order this camera, and as for now, I'm trying to pre-order it, but in Finland at the moment, it seems that the embargo hasn't opened yet. So I'm not managing to pre-order it. I will send a message to one of my local stores and see what they will say, but I might pre-order it, and it might substitute my LUMIX S5IIX for different reasons that if you are interested, we can talk about it down below, or I can create a video about it. But yeah, here we are, and take good care of yourself, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.